workday ahead of us. So, as per this month, we are on automatic behaviors. Automatic behavior. Ooh. Change the name there. We need to figure out the scope of this space. I think this will involve determining how much fits into automatic behaviors that are strictly human and automatic behaviors that we each build for ourselves. And of course, the gray area in between. So I really want to just kind of flesh out this space first, what it might encapsulate. So to just give the background in terms of part 2, why we're actually doing this. So identifying and pursuing our goals. This is going to be the practical part, the first of 2 practical parts. Part 1 was kind of foundational, and then part 2 and part 3 are practical. So we're looking at the practical levers of our agency. We get to look at deliberate reflection, just being able to reflect on the moment. We can see the biological underlying conditions that are affecting this, and what we can do to affect those levers. We can consider how to regulate emotions. Granted, we haven't really done much in this section yet. These are largely untouched. Cognitive function, this needs work, potentially adding sections or potentially moving things around. I'm not sure, but here we go. Automatic behaviors. Right now we have drives and concerns, a competition for attention and behavior. So like what drives are competing for our attention, moods and emotions. So all this stuff is not organized yet, but these are just general topics. Countering distraction and procrastination, biases and belief systems, debiasing techniques and heuristics. So we will probably go into all those topics. Today I wanted to just kind of start with nothing though, which is why I have this going on. So on here, I want to say, I want to do a comprehensive dive into the topic of our automatic behaviors. What do you think that should encompass? So before we start using the deep research mode, I think it's useful to perhaps get a sense of how we can go about the breadth of this section. Requires looking at the phenomenon through 3 distinct lenses. The biological hardware, so this is what I was alluding to. I'm glad that this is actually jumping right to where I wanted to end up. Automatic behaviors that are strictly human. So, you know what? The biological hardware, this wouldn't be... the biological hardware can be broken down into like the biological rule set behind our hardware, so like genetics, and then also all the dynamic stuff that's happening that's affecting our drives, which would also still be biological. Now there's psychology involved here, so perhaps this is more phenomenological. And then environmental triggers. Ooh. To maintain rigor, so yeah, we can't talk about like certain biases without talking about the environment. The environment are affecting these biases. They're effectively triggering these biases. So to maintain rigor, you should categorize these behaviors by their level of consciousness and their on-ramp, how they were originally formed. Interesting. Okay. Potential direction. Categorize these behaviors by their level of consciousness and their on-ramp, how they were originally formed. So we have the neurobiological foundation. Now, if I were to blow this up, let's see if this is sufficient for what we were trying to get at. Before looking at habits, you have to understand the physical structures that bypass the prefrontal cortex, the executive brain. So the question is, do we want to move things around here? Where's our, automatic behaviors seems like it could be a topic that comes right after biological conditions. as these conditions are driving the behaviors. And then perhaps emotion regulation is another lesson in reacting to these behaviors, and same with cognitive function, but we'll see. So we got the basal ganglia, how it takes over repetitive tasks to save metabolic energy, understanding behaviors that never reach the brain at all, spinal cord responses, homeostatic regulators. So we will have a lot of this discussion ready to go right by the time we get here if we move this around. So it's looking like maybe automatic behaviors would be something that should go right after biological conditions, as just like one layer of abstraction up of like what we're seeing, like these are basically more intuitive externalities of what we're looking at in biological conditions. Taxonomy of automaticity. Okay. Not all automatic behaviors are created equal. A dive should distinguish between these four categories. We got pre-attentive processes, sensory filtering, where you automatically hear your name in a crowded room. We got innate instincts, fixed action patterns that are evolutionarily hardwired. Okay, so this is great. This is what we want. Taxonomy of automaticity. Got pre-attentive processes. We got innate instincts, which I feel like we should talk about first. Overlearned skills, behaviors that were once conscious but became muscle memory. Great. So yeah, one of the concerns was how do we get all these things in here in a way that's organized? And this might lend itself to a nice organization. Now the tricky thing is all of these so you know how this is jumping down into subcategories and then subcategories. We have to just exist on one level here, one layer. So maybe we would have a single subsection for taxonomy of automaticity, or perhaps we could connect these two sections really. But we'll see. We'll see how we want to go about doing that. Habitual loops, cycle that governs lifestyle behaviors, checking a phone, emotional eating. All right. Then we got psychological mechanisms. What is this all about? This is where the logic of why we stay automatic becomes clear. Cognitive load theory. We use automaticity because the conscious mind has a narrow bandwidth. Automaticity is an efficiency hack. Dual process theory, contrast system 1 with system 2, more deliberate, logical. And then implicit bias, how social and environmental conditioning creates automatic judgments and micro behaviors that without conscious intent. Okay. Psychological mechanisms. So I just want to, I'm writing these things down because I want to keep this just in case we go crazy on this Gemini discussion. I always like having a workspace that we edit throughout, but I don't really like the canvas in these tools. And then what do we have here? We got behavioral modifications and de-automation. This is going exactly where we would go with de-biasing. So cognitive biases would be, I guess, within this psychological mechanisms. I don't know if we would want to call it that though. Okay, if the goal is comprehension of how to change these behaviors, right? Behavioral modification and de-autom. I like the lowercase here. De-automation. If the goal is comprehension of how to change these behaviors, you need to look at implementation intentions, neuroplasticity, and the role of friction. So the question is, yo, Darmanon, what's good? How's it going? Sorry, I might have missed that for a couple seconds. What's goody is that we've got a new month, new topic, and we get to learn more about automatic behaviors. Nice. Yeah, we'll see how fun this is. So I do want to consider. So for all of these topics that have just been mentioned, we really don't need anything from these two. So I'm thinking we go straight from biological conditions to automatic behaviors. Now the question is, when do I want to tell Gemini that that's what we're going to do so that it helps us out? Maybe I could start asking about what we have currently. I'm still doing that online course. Nice. How's it coming? How far through? And is it still interesting? Or are you learning a bunch of stuff? Part 1 of 4. How do they break up the parts? All right, so okay, to be clear, no, let's not tell it we want it to be practical yet. Great. I would like to include a look at competing drives, concerns, biases, competing drives. In other words, what is the adjudication here? How this connects to our intuitive concerns and all the cognitive biases that would be relevant. Okay, I can link so far, learn about resting potential, passive membranes properties, the action potential. Awesome. Some physics and mathy stuff in there. Cool. Nice. The electrical properties of the neuron. Look at this. Is this like a yin yang? Okay. If I understand this correctly, we got axons, an axon, and an axon, and then we got a bunch of dendrites. Now, what type of neuron would this be? I don't know if we know enough about the different types of neurons to know exactly which one this would be. Okay. When you say parts, do you mean like these lessons? Or no, you were saying that this is all within that. This is all so far what you've learned. So this was all part 1. Yeah, I see. Where's part 2? There are more parts. Where are the parts? Are you only able to get to part 2 after you do part 1? Is that how that works? may have lost it. Oh, we got part 2. Nice. Okay. First, but the real magic of neuroscience happens in the interaction between neurons. We examine how neurons pass signals to one another and how complex dynamics can result from just a few neurons arranged in relatively simple circuits. This is something that I would benefit from too. Look at these guys. Very cool. We'll hopefully start part 2 soon. Awesome. Yeah, if there's something that I say wrong or have just missed that I think would benefit me, please let me know. I'm glad you're in the trenches on this one. Okay. So social dynamics, all the cognitive biases, social dynamics, and the biases that causes spectrum of utility, constructive automation. Okay. Shift to persist, automated behavior, the autopilot, habit loop, efficiency in it versus, okay, strategy of intervention. Moods and emotions, countering distraction. Belief systems, etc. So what does this do for that? To expand your drive into the adjudication of drives and the social belief structures that govern them, we have to move from simple habits into the territory of neuroeconomics and social epistemology. Core question you're asking is, when two automatic systems or an automatic system and a conscious one clash, how is the winner decided? The adjudication, competing drives and priority. The brain doesn't have a single boss. It functions like a marketplace or a competitive ecosystem. So this is where I would put something like adjudication. Adjudication. Common currency of reward. Dopamine acts as the utility metric when drive competes. The brain's ventromedial prefrontal cortex weighs the expected value of each and decides based on the highest immediate or predicted neurochemical payoff. The conflict monitor. The anterior cingulate cortex is the brain's error detection center, and it flags when there is a mismatch between your goals and your automatic impulses, triggering the executive system to intervene. Okay. And then inhibition failure. Study preponent responses. These are automatic behaviors so dominant they require active, metabolically expensive suppression to stop. Jeez. All right, 2, intuitive concerns and affective heuristics. Our intuition is just highly efficient, pattern matching system 1 thinking that bypasses logic to protect us. The affect heuristic, making decisions based on an immediate emotional risk. Response. I feel bad about this, therefore it is wrong, rather than a calculation of risk. So oh, look at this somatic marker hypothesis. This would be something like psychological mechanisms. Intuitive concerns and affective heuristics. I think I could get both of these. Nice. Suggest that the gut feelings are actually the brain replaying physical sensations from past experiences to guide current behavior. I linked all 4 parts there. Oh, here's the whole thing. 4 courses, 5 months. Nice. Part 3, the brain, neurons and networks. The brain, discover what makes your brain tick in this 3rd course. And then this is the final cumulative. Okay. Human brain is a fantastically complex system capable of transferring a torrent of incoming information into thought and action. In this course, we look at how the various subsystems of the brain work together to enable us to survive and thrive in a changing world. Each lesson will challenge you with interactive segments, animations, and documentaries that explore the richness and complexity of the brain. Our forums will provide you with a place to meet other students around the world, and you can learn from each other through a series of discussion questions. Awesome. Do you want to learn about how brains perceive the world? Awesome. Very cool. And then finally, this is the proctored final exam that assesses a participant's mastery of the materials from 3 courses that are part of the program. Cool. Micro bachelors. I founded a goated neuroscientist site. I was gonna say you founded it. All right, yo, what is going on here? Okay, we've got all things neuroscience outline. Okay. Cellular and molecular neurobiology. We got resting potentials, action potentials, ionic mechanisms. Oh, geez, propagation of action potentials, synaptic transmission at the skeletal neuromuscular junction. Neurotransmitter release, synaptic transmission in the central nervous system, synaptic plasticity, organization of cell types. And then how deep are we going in for each of these? I see. Dendrites, segment and axon hillock. So it would be nice for me to go through this and learn the the most base description of all these things. Formation transfer, okay. Acetylcholine neurotransmission, biogenic amino acid, neuropeptides, genetics and neuronal disease. We got sensory system, so we're now looking at systems. We got nervous system, somatosensory, spinal cord, somatosensory pathways, processes, pain, chemical senses, vestibular system, auditory, visual. Motor systems, we got the motor systems, and then we got homeostasis and higher brain function, hypothalamus, structural organization, control of pituitary hormones. So if I understand correctly, the hypothalamus is an interface between the body and the brain via straight up chemicals. Central control of autonomic nervous system and thermoregulation, central control of feeding behavior, limbic system, hippocampus, amygdala, learning and memory, higher cortical functions, language association and executive processing. Awesome. Last review 2020, that's great. Very cool. I'm gonna give this a nice bookmark over here. Neuroscience stuff. Okay, each page has a lecture link. Oh, cool. So it actually comes with a video. Okay, there are many men in the world who see ducks as pigeons. Welcome back, Onion Helmet. The measure of man is shown by how much he is willing to call a duck, a pigeon, and himself a fool. This is a callback to yesterday, I see. I was doing the stream summaries today, and for some reason, I don't know why, not much has happened since yesterday, but it felt like we talked about that topic like a week ago. I was like, was this really yesterday? Man, and a lecture link on each page. That's crazy. So I'm guessing it's okay. It's not allowing me to watch it here, but I could go to YouTube. That's cool. Yikes. It's fine for a squid. What do you mean? Doing that in my course equations. Ah, oh, man, they snuck in math. You have to actually know the mechanism behind all these, or the I guess the math behind the mechanism behind all these. Nernst equation, gotta know it. Yeah, perhaps I do. So I'm guessing that has to do with action potentials. Someone please tell these scientists to stop doing mathematics, bro. Please just use the geometry or something. Well, once you get into geometry, aren't you now working with linear algebra and stuff like that? Our cognitive bias is the software bugs, so this would be like I think this is all within the psychological mechanisms. And then obviously there's de-automation here. But here we could get to cognitive biases, maybe in this order. But then there's social dynamics, so that's a whole big deal as well. Social dynamics and collective automaticity. So if automaticity is the operating system, biases are the hard-coded shortcuts that lead to predictable errors. Not all these errors aren't necessarily errors, right? Let me just say that these aren't necessarily errors. Many of these help us out immensely. However, now that we culturally have, that we have such a grasp on empirical science, we can see how these are merely heuristics. So this is actually kind of what comes out of this discussion. This leads to a discussion of noticeable, that's not a word, expectable and noticeable cognitive biases. So that could lead to cognitive biases. We get the cognitive biases. And consider whether they are actually leading us in the direction that we want to go in. I think it's like when the electrical force and diffusion force are balanced for a particular ion. Damn. Wow. That's so in the weeds. Okay, so the electrical force, I'm guessing this is having to do with just straight up the electricity involved with the molecules at play or the ions at play, and then diffusion force has to do with the fact that you've got a bunch of these things together and they're pushing in a way, or they are getting propelled in a way. That's my guess. That's Nernst equilibrium. The equation is how many volts to get equilibrium. Be walking into a... Oh my gosh, we got double viewers. How did they get past the guards? Me walking into a room and everyone's opinions are just their emotions in the form of logical arguments and cognitive biases. Yo. Dropping straight facts. What was it that Nietzsche said? Something along the lines of that every philosopher is simply justifying their preconceived notions and biases with their philosophies. Hell yeah. That's you know, that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to offload the reasoning to something more like a stronger heuristic than simply what is intuitive for us. I mean, we want to use what's intuitive for us because that allows us to have some sort of grounding, like we understand where we are and what we're talking about. But we need to use something else as our true North Star. Like the neuron is denser than the outside, so it has some diffusion force. Oh. Okay. This is denser in a material sense, or is this, are we still talking about electromagnetism? This is counterbalanced by an electrical force. Facts really don't change minds. True. People be like, facts don't care about your feelings. Feelings don't care about your facts, buddy. Yeah, I've got one spiel along those lines coming up. That's one of the next videos I'm dropping. Specifically on persuasion. The diffusion is a pressure thing. I forget the precise word for. Okay, I see. So it's and this has to do with the action potential itself. That you've got this diffusion pressure going up against an electrical. Oh, this is resting stuff. Oh, okay. This is pre-action potential. And then I'm guessing the action potential gets it out of equilibrium such that it now needs to move, or it gets shot out, or however you would describe an action potential. But that tension between pressure and electric allows it to be net negative at rest. That's cool. Very cool. All right, social dynamics and collective automaticity. Humans are obligatory, gregarious animals. Much of our behavior is dictated by the automatic need to maintain status and belonging. Amen, I say to thee. Social proof and mimetic desire, the automatic tendency to value what others value and mirror the behaviors of the in-group. In-group, okay. So at this point, we can probably, I think we should just tell it. We should just tell it what we're doing. Belief systems and intellectual anchoring. Beliefs serve as the structural logic for our automatic behaviors. Mental models, these are the frameworks through which we interpret the world. Once a mental model is set, our observations and reactions become automatic based on what that internal logic. Okay, so we talk about this in part 1, so we probably don't have to go into this, but we can talk about that within our cognitive, like we could talk about that at all these levels, honestly. Identity protective cognition. When a belief is tied to your identity, your brain treats an attack on that belief as a physical threat, triggering an automatic fight or flight response during a debate. This I feel like can go in this discussion. Okay, so I want to give you more context as to what I'm trying to do now that we have a good foundation set. All right, how do we go about doing this? Do I just go... I am working on a document that aims to comprehensively cover these incredibly ambitious topics. I have finished part 1. Oh, part 1's right there. Okay. I should just copy this. Here is its table of contents, just to give you give you a sense of what it covers. I am now working on part 2. The structure for part 2 will start with a major section will similarly start with a prologue, major section. Here are my notes for it. Just for reference context, I don't want to work on this right now. What do we want here? Practical lever. Okay. And then we arrive at the next major section called the practical levers of agency. Here are my notes for the intro. And then for the first section, deliberate reflection. It's kind of wild to do this. Okay. You write about vitamin D, right? I think we have to, yeah. Something about less of it makes people more moody. Yeah, I think it makes you more prone to depression, I think. So vitamin D is definitely going to be something that we talk about in part 3 for sure. I don't know if that, I mean, it's like indirectly related to your ability to get things done. So maybe we talk about in part 2 as well. Okay, now this is going all the way up to deliberate reflection. Is that what I said? Okay, and then the next section within the practical levers of agency is biological conditions with these notes. Okay. Drives and rewards. We already have a drives in here. Now, my thought was to now since we no, I'll just say my thought was to have the next section be called automatic behaviors, covering the topics we've so far discussed. All right, I'm gonna just say that. This gives it the context necessary. Shout out to breathing for being one of the most useful automatic behaviors. True, hell yeah. Well said. I don't know if we need to talk about it because it's just kind of, it's. I mean, I guess we do talk about breathing. So yeah, in emotion regulation, we're going to talk about breathing for sure. I don't know if it's in the same type of automatic behaviors that we're trying to point out here, given that these are like the practical levers that we're looking at right now. I mean, yeah, breathing is an automatic behavior. That is a practical lever, but it's a practical lever for the sake of some of these other topics that come up. So I think that's why like emotion regulation might work really well right after talking about automatic behaviors. Okay, this section follows your exploration of deliberate reflection, the lever, and biological conditions, the fuel. Here we address the programming, the automatic behaviors that constitute the vast majority of our lived experience. In the context of your framework, if reflection is the wedge of freedom, then automaticity is the default current it must navigate. To manage the machine, the agent must understand how the autopilot is wired. Oh my gosh. Automatic behavior is the mind's programming, the evolutionary mandate, efficiency over awareness. Brain is a metabolically expensive organ. Evolutionary's primary solution to this energy crisis is automaticity. The conscious mind is a narrow... So yeah, perhaps first we should point out, or maybe we should ask, is it apt to solely frame these automatic behaviors as efficiency, you know, as if it was an adaptation over simply exaptations or spandrels? I'll just say byproducts. Perhaps it's necessary that we mention efficiency, but I don't know if it's appropriate to frame all of automaticity in that lens. Okay. Cognitive load management. The conscious mind is a narrow bandwidth processor. You're right. Okay, yeah. So much of this stuff is a discussion about how top-down signals inhibit the basal ganglia. This is the hardware for automation, while the prefrontal cortex handles the way. Deliberate planning. The basal ganglia stores the routine. Once a behavior is overlearned, the loop is managed here, bypassing conscious veto unless the anterior cingulate cortex detects a prediction error. Okay. The marketplace of drives, how the mind adjudicates. You don't just have one automatic self, you have a collection of competing systems. When these drives clash, the brain acts as a neuroeconomic adjudicator. The common currency, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex assigns a value to, so this is the part of the cortex that interfaces with the limbic system most closely. To different at least I think that's what I recall from what I'm reading. To different outcomes based on expected dopamine payoff. The drive with the highest immediate valuation usually wins the bid. Right, so this is deeply pragmatic. I think it's important to make this type of acknowledgement, but we need to be careful as to what intuitive conclusions that means. Like, you know, when something wins out, what does that mean towards what's going on in your brain? So it's not always going to be the same simple conclusion there. The conflict monitor. When two drives are nearly equal, the anterior cingulate cortex creates the feeling of cognitive tension. This is the signal for the agent to step in. Without deliberate reflection, the system defaults to the drive with the strongest historical reinforcement, the habit. All right, the taxonomy of the automatic. To intervene effectively, the agent must distinguish between different types of programming. So innate and homeostatic, reflexes and survival drives. These are hard-coded. Then we got overlearned signals. So this is what we just talked about, right? Or is this a slightly different framing? Innate instincts, overlearned signals, habitual loops, and then the heuristics and biases, which were part of this discussion. Cognitive shortcuts that automate thinking rather than acting. These are interpretive filters. Interesting. Well, I would say thinking and acting are the same thing, so we need to be careful about that one. For the taxonomy of the automatic, we need to be careful about not oversimplifying. These underlying mechanisms, the embodied cognition science tells us that we can't think about thinking as different from acting. Perhaps we can, however, think about these as affecting our conscious thought in some sense, or yeah, but or if these are largely unconscious, then we can think about them as affecting top-down signals, which aren't necessarily conscious. All right, the social and belief layer. Our automaticity isn't just biological, it is socially embedded. We possess shared programming that allows for group cohesion, mimetic desire. We automatically value what those around us value. This is a social autopilot that helps us maintain status and belonging without constant calculation. Identity protective cognition. When a core belief is challenged, the brain automatically triggers a threat response. Right, the interpreter module then creates a rationalization to protect the ego, often before we've even consciously processed the counter evidence. These are the automatic search images, the implicit bias. Okay. The wedge of de-automation, right? That's what we do want to talk about. Okay, I should pre-bias this, saying like I generally like this direction, and I want to merge it with my notes, with my document notes, as well as my notes from this conversation. Before we do that, I have some points. Okay, okay. Yo, Birdbanes, good morning. Welcome, welcome. We are on the topic of automatic behaviors, which is going to be one of these main fundamental sections in part 2. Okay, these are gave up on IAT. We are destined to return to consciousness at some point. It's only a matter of time. But I need to make sure that we keep going forward. You know, we can have these consciousness streams interspersed, and we still have to watch more of the Alex O'Connor discussion, which will probably bring us back to that consciousness discussion anyway. And maybe we do that today after I get burnt out from making these notes, but as if I'm actually writing anything other than these responses I'm giving. But yes, yeah, maybe in like 30 minutes, maybe we'll start watching that video again. Do something fun. All right. Prevent the document from falling into pop psychology tropes. Yes, by integrating exaptation and embodied cognition, you move the discussion from a computer metaphor of the mind toward a more biologically and philosophically rigorous model of the living system. Here's how we can refine those sections to meet your standard of accuracy and comprehension. Okay, refining the why, efficiency versus necessity. You're correct to push back on efficiency as the sole driver. While metabolic efficiency is a massive selection pressure, it isn't the whole story. The problem of combinatorial explosion. Without automaticity, a system would be paralyzed by choice. If every muscle fiber, contraction, or sensory filter required a top-down decision, the executive would be buried under a mountain of micro decisions. Automaticity isn't just about saving energy, it is a functional necessity for real-time agency. Automaticity is exaptation. Many automatic behaviors we see today likely started as adaptations for physical survival. For example, the startle reflex, but have been co-opted for social survival. For example, our automatic tendency to mimic the posture of someone we like is an exaptation of the mirror neuron system, originally for learning motor skills, now used for social signaling and cohesion. That's a great example. The byproduct view, spandrels. Some automaticity is likely a byproduct of how neural architecture is wired. If you have a highly interconnected brain optimized for pattern recognition, for example, to find food, an automatic byproduct is that you will also see patterns in random noise. Apophenia and superstition. It's not efficient to be superstitious. It's a tax we pay for having a pattern matching brain. Okay, yeah, I think these are important stipulations to make. Because you could always make this argument that like everything that our brain is doing for us has to be good because it's evolved, and that's not always the case. Okay, behavioral biology is going to be more straightforward compared to integrated information theory. That was my hope. This part 2. My hope was that part 2 would be much more straightforward. That said, it's much larger of a topic. Like there's so many sub facets that I need to make sure we get right and that we include, that I think part 2 is going to end up being like twice as long as part 1. It's kind of wild. But I do agree that part 1 was more complex in the nature of the subject matter. So it was really important that we spent all that time on part 1 to make sure that we got it. We got a good foundation. Okay, refining the taxonomy, the embodied interface. To honor the embodied cognition perspective, we must stop treating thought as a separate layer that sits on top of action. Instead, we can frame automatic behaviors as biases in the state of the system. Right. Action-oriented predictive processing. We don't perceive and then act. We perceive through the lens of potential action. Automatic behaviors are essentially presets in our motor and sensory systems, and then affecting the top-down signal. Unconscious processes don't just happen in the basement. They tint the windows of the executive suite. What the hell does that mean? What does that mean? Okay. I'm guessing they just affect the top-down signals. Like, this is just saying the same thing, just using a roundabout metaphor. The cognitive preset, an automatic bias like an in-group bias, isn't necessarily a thought you have. It is a prior that makes it physically easier for your brain to process information that fits the bias and harder to process information that doesn't. Beautiful. The weighting of evidence. These automatic mechanisms act as volume knobs on incoming data. If we have an automatic fear response to a certain stimulus, the bottom-up signal is given so much weight that the top-down executive signal, for example, I am safe, cannot overcome it. Cool. That's the type of... both of those points are huge. We should be talking that way, not thinking overriding action. Just like pareidolia is the psychological phenomenon of perceiving familiar, often meaningful patterns, specifically faces, in random, vague, or ambiguous stimuli. Right. And I actually do want to I want to follow this up. Along the topic of that, I think I recently read that we leverage the same part of our brain that that identifies faces for contextual stimuli. I should say for visual stimuli related to, I don't know, contexts of expertise. For example, a car lover will use that part to be able to identify different types of cars. A plant lover will use it to identify different types of plants. I know the book, I think it was Sapolsky, I think he used cars, that example. He didn't use the plant example, but I'm testing my luck here. I would guess that it would work with plants as well. All right, the fusiform face area located in the fusiform gyrus of the temporal lobe. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that the fusiform face area was a domain-specific module, meaning its only job was to process human faces. However, your observation aligns with the expertise hypothesis, which suggests that the FFA is actually a domain general area for fine-grained visual discrimination between similar-looking objects within a category. So the mechanics of visual expertise, when you look at a random collection of leaves, your brain might just see greenery using general object recognition pathways. But for an expert, the FFA gets recruited. Okay, here's how that works. Subordinate level categorization. Most of our object recognition is entry level. Expertise requires subordinate level recognition. The FFA excels at noting the minute structural differences required for this. And then holistic processing, just as we don't look at a face by analyzing an eye, then a nose, then a mouth. Experts process their objects of interest holistically. A bird watcher perceives the gestalt of a bird, its proportions and posture, rather than a checklist of features. And then neuroplasticity. Research using greebles, nonsensical 3D shapes, showed that after participants were trained to categorize them, their FFAs began to fire when looking at them, just as they would for faces. Awesome. Connection to pareidolia. That's my guess of how it's pronounced. This helps explain why pareidolia is so common, because the FFA is essentially overtrained from birth to find faces. It has a very low threshold for activation. It is tuned for sensitivity, making sure you never miss a face, rather than specificity, making sure what you see is actually a face. In the face versus expertise debate, the consensus is shifting toward a middle ground. The FFA may have an innate bias toward the geometry of faces, but it is also a flexible, high-resolution processor that can be hijacked by any subject you spend thousands of hours studying. Awesome. Death to the bird watcher. Very nice. Very nicely done. Okay. That's a great great tangent, and possibly something I could make a video out of. So now that I've been editing previous streams, I'm kind of like, I have in my mind the science of what makes a good like a good segment. So when we go into one of those types of things, I think that's like a good short segment that we can make a video and or a short out of, depending how long that was. I think 3 minutes is the max a short can be. Okay, so then it says updated section, automatic behaviors, the integrated view, the biological nature of automaticity, the hierarchy of influence. Rather than a top-down versus bottom-up hierarchy, we should view this as a bidirectional negotiation. Okay, we've got innate physiological constraints, homeostatic regulators, and reflexes. These are the most rigid programs affecting our baseline arousal before we even see the world. Then we got affordance-based automaticity. As per embodied cognition, our brain automatically maps the world in terms of what we can do with it. This is the implicit self-understanding from part 1, manifesting as immediate motor readiness. Wow. Thank you for that one. I don't think we need that, but heuristic filtering, the predictive priors. Cognitive biases are not errors in logic. They are high probability guesses that the brain uses to resolve ambiguity. They shape our controlled hallucinations by making certain interpretations of reality easier to see than others. So Gemini does this thing that I think is terrible, but I never tell it not to do it, so that's probably why it's doing it. Where I gave it information, and now it's like trying to inject that information, like controlled hallucination, wherever it can, and that's not great. We're not going to do that in the document unless it's important to, like, unless there is a topic that we introduce earlier on that is important to bring up later. But I don't think controlled hallucination is that type of topic. All right, social linguistic scripts, automaticity and how we use language and social norms. These scripts allow us to navigate complex social landscapes without having to solve the game theory of every interaction from scratch. The adjudication of agency. When we reflect, we aren't overriding a program from the outside. We are injecting a new signal into a noisy ongoing negotiation. The wedge of freedom is the ability to notice that our top-down prediction, for example, this person is a threat, is being heavily weighted by an automatic bottom-up signal, for example, a racing heart. The practical goal is not to eliminate the bottom-up signal, but to use conceptual framing, linguistic tags, to re-weight it, allowing the system to settle into a more accurate or intentional state. Beautiful. Does this framing better capture the adjudicate? Okay. Yes, but don't feel the need to inject phrases / words. No, what do we want to get at here? Concepts from those earlier sections, notes, unless, of course, it's essentially the same topic. Of course, it's absolutely necessary, or it's essentially the same topic. Okay. Now, here are my document notes, and I think I'm just going to copy these document notes. How far down does this go? Debias. Okay. And then I'm going to say these are not in any privileged order. Don't try to outline this section based. No, what I said. Don't use the organization of these notes in for outlining this section. I'm gonna put that there, and then I'm gonna say, and then I attached my notes from this conversation, which does have, okay, which more so encapsulates, no, I'm gonna just say that. And I'm gonna download this as a markdown document so that it retains its formatting. And then I'm gonna just paste. Okay. Finished part 1. Yeah, nice. So, yeah, I guess, do they quiz you at all after these parts, or is it just gonna, there's just gonna be this final exam? And, oh, I should give you a Shermadink. There you go. There was questions as I went, okay, cool, nice. Seems the final exam you need to pay. So you've gotten away with doing this for free, and then you can pay to get that certificate? Oh, sweet. That's a great deal. All right. Let's go through this, and then we can switch over to the video. Have some fun. At some point, I'm probably gonna I'm gonna want to do this in the morning. I'm gonna want to wake up and just grind this, get it all organized, make sure everything that we have in our notes our current notes are included, get it into an order that sounds good. Yeah, I think that's what I did for the attention one. And then we can start ripping out deep research prompts and like just fill out every subtopic that needs to be filled out. Okay, to preserve the scarce resources of the biological fuel described previously, the brain automates repeated tasks, decisions, and interpretations. This autopilot is not merely an efficiency hack. It is a functional necessity of real-time agency, preventing the system from collapsing under the weight of combinatorial choice. The neurobiology of autopilots. The brain functions as a predictive machine. So yeah, a lot of this is heavily biased by what I had in those notes. Habitually projecting the past onto the future to minimize the metabolic cost of living. This process involves a competitive ecosystem of neural structures. All right, so we got those same neural structures now at like the level of abstraction of what type of mechanism they're operating as within the system. Wow, the most primitive level of automation, where responses like a startle reflex are processed in. Okay, this is a fragment where responses are processed in the spinal cord before ever reaching the brain. The hierarchy of automation. Habits of thought, the cognitive biases. Oh, this is cool. Okay, let me think about this. So, foundation, adjudication of drives. Did we talk about adjudication here? The hierarchy of automaticity. We got habits of thought, cognitive biases. Interpretive filters that shape our controlled hallucinations. These are often evolutionarily rooted, prioritizing survival over accuracy, but can lead to systematic errors in a modern context. All right. Now I want to separate this idea of cognitive biases from habits of thought. In my mind, habits of thought are more so connected to your belief system, and then cognitive biases kind of operate regardless of your belief system. And yeah. Social gravity and collective automaticity, the strategy of intervention overwriting the code. Yes, yes. All right, let me just write these. I might want to use the ChatGPT transcription here, just so I don't have to type it all out. Just a bunch of points, all the points that I think I could bring up right now. Okay, so in this section, we need to keep in mind that we only have one layer of subsections. So imagine the section is automatic behaviors, and then under that, we just have one level of headers. So we can't have subheaders under that. Given that, what do you think that the subheaders should be? Okay. That's going to be probably the last question. Next. We've got the neurobiology of the autopilot. Okay, starting off with in this section, it seems that the neurobiology of the autopilot leverages what we just learned in the previous section to discuss perhaps what we could describe as like one layer of abstraction up the behaviors of these neural networks that contribute to what we intuitively understand as automatic behaviors. All right, I'm going to grab that so far. And then I think I want to kind of give a question from that. Am I going to start each one of these with okay? What did I really want to get at here? The adjudication marketplace. Okay. Maybe something down here. Keep in mind that within each of these subsections, we need a narrative direction that is both cohesive and coherent within the subsection, but also works with the other subsections in creating a section-wide narrative that makes sense. That's all I got. I wonder if auditory pareidolia is funnier than visual pareidolia. Ooh. Ooh, funnier in what sense? I'm going to try to think about this for a second here. So this is what you're now imagining hearing things when they're not actually there. I guess first of all, what's the word for touch? I don't remember, but the pareidolia for touch. Yes, you can post a link. Yeah, is it going to not allow you? And then what's the command I can give you right now? Oh, okay. I think YouTube's always allowed. Yeah, like the phantom like phone or phantom phone vibration. Like I think that's pretty funny. Auditory though, what would that be? You're hearing You're hearing. After all these years, I finally know the lyric. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is pretty good. It would be pretty tough to memorize all these. But yeah, if you were to, let's just say you like really loved this video and you kept watching it, then yeah, you would only hear this whenever the song plays. And yeah, that is pretty funny. Now I guess yeah, I wonder if this only happens in songs though. Like this is kind of a new thing. This is a really new development. But yeah, you could the funny thing is you can weaponize this, and then you can you can send it to someone, and if it was more simple, then it would be almost like losing the game. Like I don't know if anyone ever played I don't know if anyone ever lost that game in middle school, but where you can just basically inject this thing to someone. For visual pareidolia, we see the face on Mars and Jesus on bread, right? I mean, people saw all kinds of things in the woods over many years. I wonder if you would hear, like, would you ever hear rustling in the leaves without actually hearing it, or without there actually being the sound waves to make you hear that? Okay. Is this even coherent? Keep in mind that within each of these subsections, we need a narrative direction that is both cohesive and coherent within the subsection, but also works with the other subsections in creating a section-wide narrative that makes sense. Section-wide, automatic. Behaviors, narrative. Oh. Am I going crazy on the... Like, we only have this, right? Practical levers is a heading 2. Can we make this a heading 1? Are we not allowed to make this a heading 1? In part 1, what do we do? This is a heading 2 as well? Man, did we just skip out on heading 1? Why did we skip the heading 1? Maybe I just thought it was too big. So yeah, we're dealing with, because these are all under practical levers of agency, which I think they should be under this major section, then we're dealing with already a header 3, and under that we only have header 4s. We don't go any deeper than header 4, so we have to fit all of this information within a heading 3, which is a major yikes, but we can do it. We can figure it out. All right, what would be the next thing? Conflict metaphor, reflex arc, the hierarchy of automaticity. Okay. Yeah, we need to be careful about the hierarchy. We just don't want to make it seem like these have more authority in some sense. Oh, hierarchy. Oh, hierarchy. Okay. Habits of thought. Okay, that was the thing I wanted to mention. For habits of thought, my idea was that this would be different than cognitive biases. In my mind, cognitive biases would be there for any human, but different humans would have different habits of thought. Now, there's obviously a lot of gray area in between this, as a lot of our culture is retained over many years. So you can imagine that currently there's aspects of the habits of our thought that are shared cross cultures. That being said, perhaps we should talk about that type of range as well. Cognitive biases, though, I would want to talk about the things that would affect anyone regardless of their belief system. And then habits of thought, we would want to go all the way to the point where we can talk about habits of negative thoughts or habits of thinking that the world is a certain way. This is all to continue to bolster this idea that our thoughts are conditioned and they aren't some reflection of some absolute epistemology of the world. Okay, cognitive biases and confirmation biases. Absolutely. Well, I think I just have cognitive bias within confirmation bias, or I'm sorry, other way around. Confirmation bias was one of the biases that we just kind of have under this topic. Heuristics, combating beliefs, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive biases, loss aversion, confirmation bias, anchoring, the affect heuristic, the availability heuristic, overconfidence bias, hindsight bias. We're gonna try to talk about all of them. Anyone that would be relevant here, which could make this a little long. Cognitive biases would seem to be snap reactions, whereas confirmation biases are self-reinforced attitudes over time with conscious vested interest. So why wouldn't so I do agree that confirmation biases are reinforced, right? Like, this is a recursive system, but I would point out that confirmation biases are also snap reactions and largely unconscious, even though there is obviously conscious vested interest. So it is, you are right in pointing out that it is quite complicated. It's like it has its own, like, it should be in its own discussion. We should spend some more time on cognitive bias, or on confirmation bias, or confirmation biases. But yeah, I would imagine confirmation biases are pretty pervasive. Now, perhaps I just don't understand the scope of cognitive biases well enough. Social gravity and collective automaticity. So after this, I should say we need to figure out how to have the conversation of cognitive biases and social dynamics in such a way where we point out how these are connected concepts, and that a lot of the time our cognitive biases or confirmation biases are affected by the social dynamics at play. Perhaps social dynamics is a more fundamental topic to talk about prior to cognitive biases, because that affects how we think about what loss would be in the case of loss aversion, or what the implications of confirmation would be. Those are just some examples, but we would want to go in that direction. Okay. Wary of cops. Too good to be true. Or are these cultural idioms? Would I say idioms? Yeah, like those are so culturally weighted. You mentioned social settings, right? Then what else do we have? Pluralistic ignorance. Okay. The strategy of intervention, overriding the code, right? We will want to go pretty in depth for the strategy of intervention. I think we want to cover how to effectively leverage these layers for the sake of our own feeling of freedom and intentionality here. Okay, I'm gonna just give it all that stuff. Energy Dompter, what's good? Are you going to discuss addiction recovery in the document? Absolutely, and this is exactly where we're going to talk about it. That's what I just said there, right? These interventions, we need to talk about addiction right here. This is an automatic behavior that we want to be able, like, that's something that people need to have tools to get out of or navigate. Captain's log. What if Jesus is the way to happiness? We need to investigate. I think Jesus is a way to happiness, and we will investigate. But that we have to investigate in part 3. We can't investigate that yet. Also, I have a physics question, if that's okay. I think it's okay. I think we're chilling. Chemically reprogram the brain to seek repetitive rewards. Are you asking if that's going to be a topic here, or like I think we need to talk about stuff like TikTok brain as an addiction. Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the type of addiction. Yep. The addiction that we can grant. So addiction's a weird topic because the bar of what counts as an addiction is pretty personal. So people might talk about an addiction in such a way where it needs to actually infringe upon how they go about their day or their goals before they would call it an addiction. Now, I talk about addictions as just the physiological reality. So I can enjoy coffee every day and call it addiction, right? And I'm going to say, I don't think that this coffee is negatively affecting me in ways that I really care about right now. And there's nothing in my conscience that's telling me that I shouldn't be drinking this coffee. But it's an addiction at the end of the day, right? Same with video games. A lot of the times it's like when I played Silksong, there was 100% an addictive quality there. I definitely built an addiction over that time. Granted, there was so much innate interest and motivation for me to play that game that who knows where the addiction started, and just my interest in playing that game began. But yeah, we do want to talk about also how to navigate the idea of addiction for people, like how they can think about whether or not they are addicted to something. And that would be that's actually something I should have asked about in this thing. But we'll remember it. Okay, what did I miss? No one comes to the Father except through him. I feel like I've heard that before. What's your perspective on the relational interpretation of quantum physics? What is the relational interpretation of quantum physics? Gaming to hard drugs. Well, you're just going above and beyond at that point. first proposed by Ravelli in 1994, fundamentally shifts the focus of physics from what objects are to how objects interact. It suggests that the state of a physical system is not an absolute property, but rather a description of the relationship between two systems. And the idea that the state of the system is always relative to an observer. Okay. I don't know how to navigate this space, but let's just... how do contemporary leading scientists think about this framing today? Is it commensurate with the different leading quantum theories today? For example, many worlds. I meant it being a spectrum for, oh, I see, gaming to hard drugs. I thought you were saying we're gaming on hard drugs. As a spectrum from lightweight addiction to heavyweights. Yeah, and it depends what we mean by lightweight addiction, because gaming can certainly, like, obviously like gambling. I mean, I guess you could say gambling is a different thing than gaming, even though it is gaming. But like gambling can be as detrimental to your life as hard drugs. I guess you would say that hard drugs are usually just worse because it's physically, it's hurting you physically, in addition to probably financially hurting you and hurting your relationships. So hard drugs seem to be the worst. I think you could make that argument. But it would be difficult to determine whether or not like one of these other types of addictions are worse. Like, is food worse than gaming, worse than gambling, worse than porn, worse than, you know, like how do you like measure these? And I think that's why like that type of discussion needs to be personal. It's to each their own in that regard. But chances are, yeah, I think you're right. Hard drugs are going to be the worst. All right, currently occupies a unique high traffic niche in the foundation of physics. While it isn't the standard textbook view, Copenhagen still holds that title for utility. Its influence has surged in the mid-2020s because it attempts to solve the measurement problem without the baggage of infinite universes or hidden variables. I see. So it has moved from a fringe interest to a serious contender in quantum foundations. Leading figures have spent the last few years refining its logical rigor. It's increasingly seen as the most economical interpretation because it adds no new math. It just reinterprets what the existing math means. The niche problem, despite its growth, it remains a minority view compared to many worlds popular among cosmologists. Cosmologists are what specifically? Origin, evolution, and ultimate fate of the universe? Okay. And cubism, popular among information theorists. Critics argue that RQM is vague about when an interaction actually counts as a fact. There is a live debate on whether RQM is truly consistent with the standard mathematical framework of quantum mechanics or if it accidentally contradicts it in complex scenarios like the GHZ state. Versus many worlds. These two theories are often called cousins because they both derive the Hugh Everett's original relative state formulation. However, they reach diametrically opposite conclusions about the nature of the universe. So, the wave function, a mathematical tool to calculate probabilities, not a physical entity. I see. Many worlds, a physically real entity that describes the entire universe. Okay. The universe, there is only one world, but facts are relative to observers. And then there are infinite branching worlds. Every outcome is real. View from nowhere. Rejected. No system can see the whole state of the universe. And then many worlds accepted. The universal wave function is the ultimate objective truth. And then ontology. Relational, informational. Reality is a web of interactions. Realist, materialist. Reality is the universal wave function. This is tricky because both of these are equally satisfying for me. just at an intuitive level. But are they commensurate? No. Recent refinement. Cross perspective links. The old criticism of RQM was that it boarded on solipsism. If my truth is different from your truth, how do we ever agree on anything? Modern RQM solves this by positing that all information processed by an observer must be stored in physical variables of that observer. This means that if you and I want to compare notes, we have to physically interact. That interaction is just another quantum event that aligns our relative facts. We don't agree because we are seeing an absolute reality. We agree because we have interacted and become entangled in a way that makes our relative facts consistent with each other. Okay, now I'm not liking this as much. Because we're not talking about like agreeing or you know, like the meaning that we're talking about. We're talking about like the facts of what we each see. And I don't think we're aligning in that way just by being entangled in a physical way. Okay, logical rigor and contemporary consensus. If you value logic and evidence, the current consensus is that RQM is mathematically consistent but philosophically radical. It forces you to accept that there is no objective world in the classical sense. There is only a network of correlations. Many scientists find this hard to swallow because it removes the ground from under our feet. However, from those working on quantum gravity, RQM is highly attractive because it aligns perfectly with the relational nature of general relativity, where time and space are also relative. Would you like me to look into how RQM specifically attempts to resolve the EPR paradox or the critique of spooky action at a distance? Quantum entanglement equals long distance dating. Very nice. That's actually a great name for an app for long distance dating. That it should be called like spooky action at a distance should be the tagline. That would be so great. Oh man. If I had a comedy show, I would use that as a thing in it. Okay, it seems conceptually similar to Deleuzian metaphysics, where identity is a result of difference rather than vice versa. However, to my understanding, your document avoids ontological commitments like that. Right, yeah, I think it's still operating in a different space. Even though it sounds like it's very commensurate with the stuff that I say, I think it's inappropriate to like talk about our subjective relative view of the world and connect that with some physical reality that there, you know, that like what is an observer in this setup here? What counts as an observer in the RQM view? Because, yeah, if everything's relative to the observer, then it really matters what the observer is. Okay, in relational quantum mechanics, the definition of an observer is perhaps the most radical departure from the traditional Copenhagen view. It's any physical system whatsoever. There's no special status given to humans, conscious minds, or complex laboratory equipment. Okay, so this is what I would hope. The following can all function as observers. Right, okay. This is often called the democratization of the observer. Okay, cool. This is cool. This is good. Measurement equals interaction. A measurement is not a special event involving a PhD and a notebook. A measurement is simply any physical interaction where one system's state becomes correlated with another's. When an electron hits a screen, the screen measures the electron. When two parts collide, they measure each other. Because the interaction is the measurement, a fact is established only relative to the system. Okay, so a fact, like that's the issue here, though. Like, what is, like, this is, I mean, this setup's fine. It's just that it becomes unintuitive after we talk about a fact as something like we can't intuit what a fact would mean here. Okay, I'm struggling to understand what a fact functions as within this framework. Given that observers aren't simply humans with conscious minds, and I think that is an appropriate way to think about observers. Then a fact isn't what I intuitively think of when I think of facts. So I'm not sure what this framework is even stating, because I don't have an intuition of what these implications could even mean. I think that's what I'm trying to get at here. Have I heard of the Codex of Codex? I have not heard of Codex. Maybe unless it's an AI tool. But I haven't looked into it. Is that what we're referring to? That AI thing? Okay. Yeah, Codex. Codex. Code with Codex CLI. Do we get this? Am I in? Everywhere you work. Codex is built into your IDE, CLI, GitHub, and the web. Works side by side locally, or let it keep going in the cloud when you step away. Deep code review. Codex reviews pull requests using the entire code base, running code when needed to suggest improvements. What should we code next? Can we get into GitLab? Codex GitLab. Workarounds, you could just allow individual developers to have a branch that they use via GitHub and then let them make commits from that branch to your main branch on GitLab. Okay, that makes sense. So we have to use GitHub, but we can use it with GitLab. We can just push those changes to GitLab as well. All right. Maybe we should try this out someday. Maybe we should set up a coding day. The reason we're digging into this is that Codex could speed up internal dev productivity, especially for boilerplate and test generation, but integration friction with GitLab is the blocker. Okay. The other question is LLM leaderboard. Where are we? That scales. What is this? LLM evals that scales. Hello? Trusted LLM evaluation. Is it though? Is it trusted? Best evaluation tool. Am I going crazy here? Are these are all sponsored results? Get out of here. Okay. LLM leaderboard. What are we doing for coding? Agentic coding. Okay, so we want to be using GPT over Gemini. Claude seems to be popping off constantly. So they're neck and neck in reasoning. Yeah, this isn't enough of a lead to warrant me switching back to ChatGPT for most of our reasoning stuff yet. Also, this is kind of big. What's going on there? Does it not have GPT 5.2 in this? Whoa, Claude. All right, let's let this rip. All right, to understand RQM, you have to discard the social or linguistic definition of a fact and replace it with a physical definition. In RQM, a fact is not a statement of truth. It is a discrete physical event. Okay, fine. Redefining the fact, in classical physics, we assume a particle has a position all the time. In RQM, the particle has no position until it interacts with something else. A fact is the outcome of an interaction. So, okay, so is it the case that RQM doesn't actually say that there is no ontological bedrock of the physical world? It's rather that we just don't have, I don't know, some access to it via these quantum equations. As far as we so that this would be an important distinction, but I think I could like this. I think this is good stuff. It has no position until it interacts with something else. In this case, a position is pragmatic for the perspective of our science slash the intuitive shift. Facts as impacts. Think of a fact not as a piece of knowledge, but as a physical impact. For the relative perspective that our science math takes in a given situation, which we find empirical. So the standard intuition, the bells are there at specific coordinates, whether I touch them or not, and RQM intuition. The concept of location or sound for those bells doesn't exist in a vacuum. If a breeze hits a bell, the bell rings. That ring is the fact. The fact is the specific way System A was affected by System B. To a person standing outside the room who didn't hear the ring, the fact of the ring does not exist. It's just that it isn't that just that they don't know about it. It literally has no physical reality in their relational frame. Whether something has physical reality in its frame is determined by whether we can empirically notice such a effect. I'll say is seemingly. What does this really mean for reality? It means that reality is not a thing we all inhabit, it's a web of interactions. So once again, I think this might be too far, but I'm going to see how it responds. Logical gulp. The implication is that there is no God's eye view. There is no master log of facts in the universe. So this is actually quite commensurate with the stuff we talk about in the document. Okay. Your assessment is leaning toward a view called epistemic structural realism, the idea that there is a real world out there, but we only have access to the relationships, the math. But okay, this is not what I was trying to push. I'm just saying that we can't discount it. That this Okay, but this might actually help me out. Just to summarize, I'm not saying that epistemic structural realism is right. I'm just wondering if it's the case that RQM doesn't actually disprove epistemic structural realism. Granted, it does point out that whatever we think of as reality is affected by relativity. So we really don't have any grasp of what that reality would be. Okay, what a true reality would be. All right, let's see if that... Okay. You're effectively asking, is RQM an ontological claim about what the world is, or an epistemic claim about what we can know? Short answer is, the proponents argue it is an ontological claim. They aren't just saying we lack access to the bedrock. They're saying the bedrock itself is made of relations, not stuff. All right, this is trickier for me to swallow. And once again, this actually did say it wrong. So I'm going to try to edit it once more. I'm really trying to get at, they aren't just saying we lack access to the bedrock. This isn't what I'm accusing them of. I'm accusing them of just saying that we can't think about the way that we usually think about reality as some bedrock, but that doesn't actually disprove the possibility of bedrock. But that isn't to say we should think about bedrock. I just want to reiterate this once more so you understand the nuance I'm getting at. Let me try to think of this. I'm not accusing them of what should I say here? They aren't just saying we lack access to the bedrock. I just want to reiterate this once more so you understand the nuance I'm getting at. It seems as though their framework doesn't actually dispel the possibility of some epistemic bedrock. However, it is pointing out that everything that we think of as the bedrock currently is made of relations, not stuff. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, but I think it could be said even more clearly. But the answer is going to be the same, right? I thought we were doing more videos. I thought we were doing videos today. Oh man, I think we will do a video. Maybe I'll do 15 minutes of a video, and then we could continue video tomorrow as well. You put that nail. Okay, regarding the philosophical tension, your summary is precise. It's an ontological theory about relations, but it functions largely as an epistemic warning about what we can claim to know. To address your nuance directly, RQM does not disprove an ontological bedrock. Rather, it renders the concept of a non-relational bedrock physically irrelevant and logically inaccessible. This I would be fine with. I know it seemed like I just morphed that until I got the answer that made sense, but or that I was kind of looking for here. But I don't think this really matters too much. I think this just allows me to make sense of it more effectively. But okay, the epistemic structural realism, the idea that we can know the structures of the world, but not the nature of the things in themselves. RQM actually pushes this further into ontic structural realism. My point, there might be stuff, but we only have access to the relations. That's my point. And it's saying, hey, we're going farther and saying the relations are the bedrock. There's no stuff underneath them. And Ravelli explicitly argues that the search for a substance or bedrock behind the relations is a leftover habit from classical thinking. In RQM, if you strip away all the relations, how a particle affects other things, there's nothing left. The thing is defined entirely by its interactions. Okay. I should then make one argument. Given that humans largely operate in a singular entangled system and we each have a similar conscious empirical view of reality, then this begs the question, what is really the difference between thinking about the relations as some sort of classical bedrock, given that we're always coming from pretty much the same relation? Now, granted, obviously, when we're talking about science, we want to be as exact as possible. So that isn't to write off RQM. I think we would still want to highlight the nuance here. But pragmatically, this doesn't seem to be a huge deal for most science even. Okay. Let's run with that. And then let's watch a video. Good rabbit hole today. This is a good rabbit hole, yeah. We got into a popular burgeoning quantum theory that might fit nice with all the things we talk about in this channel, but also our own intuitions. So such that we're not in a position to actually say like this is more clear than many worlds, but at least it's nice to have multiple contenders that make sense in some regard. Okay, the pragmatism of position. You are correct that in RQM, a fact like position is pragmatic. When we say an electron is at position X, we are really saying in the interaction between the electron and the detector, the information exchange resulted in the value X. It is real in that frame because that interaction has physical consequences. It is not real in the sense of being an absolute coordinate in a cosmic grid. All right. Does it dispel the possibility of an epistemic bedrock? Strictly speaking, no interpretation of physics can disprove a hidden bedrock. You could always argue, as in Broglie-Bohm pilot wave theory, that there is a definable absolute reality with stuff and positions that we just happen to be blind to. Yeah, I would say this is also like equally inappropriate though. Like it would be inappropriate to say there's definitely not one, and it would be inappropriate to say that we know that there is one. However, RQM's logical stance is if a bedrock exists but never manifests except through relations, then the bedrock is a redundant concept. Yep. The relativity of reality. You noted that we have no grasp of what a true reality would be. RQM's most radical and perhaps most difficult claim is that the true reality is the sum of these relative perspectives. Think of it like the shape of a mountain. We can't use any type of metaphor that operates in the classical space. Summary of the nuance. Okay. And then I'm just going to ask this, and then we watch some Alex O'Connor here. And okay. Oh, we didn't even look at the answers here, but we could do that tomorrow. We could start off on a bang. Your observation is logically sound and hits on the way we were able to get away with classical physics for centuries. Pragmatically, for almost all human scale science, the distinction between absolute bedrock and shared relational facts is indeed negligible. However, the huge deal appears when we push science to its logical and physical extremes. Here's the breakdown of why the distinction matters, even if it feels invisible in daily life. So we all inhabit a similar relation. In physics, this is explained by decoherence. Because humans and our instruments are massive and constantly bombarded by photons, air molecules, and gravity, we are entangled with a massive environment. This constant interaction averages out the quantum weirdness. So we all end up agreeing on the state of the world because we are all part of the same macro observer system. The nuance is that RQM doesn't say there is no objective-looking world. It says that what we call objectivity is actually intersubjectivity, a massive agreement between billions of relative perspectives. Now, this sounds very similar to the stuff I usually say in the document, but once again, this is not the same thing, even though it sounds almost exact. All right, when does the bedrock versus relation distinction matter? If RQM were just a philosophical relabeling of things we already knew, it wouldn't be very useful. The distinction becomes a huge deal in 3 specific scientific areas. Okay, quantum computing and lab scale experiments. We intentionally isolate a system from the shared human frame. Inside the fridge, a qubit is in a superposition. To the computer's internal components, a fact might have occurred. To the human outside, that fact has not occurred yet. If we treat the qubit's state as a classical bedrock fact, we could fail to build the computer. We must treat the state as relative to the observer to maintain the coherence necessary for quantum calculation. All right, that's fine and all, but really what's important is what implications does this give us? Quantum gravity, the holy grail. This is where they find RQM as most vital. General relativity tells us that space and time are relational. There is no absolute clock in the universe. Quantum mechanics, Copenhagen style, usually assumes an external observer standing on a fixed stage of space-time. The conflict, you can't have an external observer for the whole universe. RQM solves this by allowing the observer to be inside the system. Without this relational shift, the math for a quantum theory of the universe literally breaks down because there's nowhere for a classical observer to stand. The measurement problem. If there is a classical so yeah, I mean, that's still fine. This is good, but we want more. If there's a classical bedrock, then we have to explain exactly when a quantum wave collapses. Does it happen at the atom, the camera, the human brain? Every attempt to find that point of collapse has failed. RQM sidesteps this by saying there's no collapse into a bedrock. There's only an interaction that creates a fact for those two things. This removes the need for a magic moment when the rules of physics change from quantum to classical. All right, comparing the frameworks to use the metaphor. Okay. Logical conclusion. Okay. This is fine and all, but what does it give us? What utility does it provide? Or is it simply yet another interpretation, like many worlds, that is simply competing on the grounds of what sounds more intuitive given what we know? All right. Honestly, we should do a Das Kapital reading stream and reading club one day. I mean, wouldn't that take a long time? Isn't that book huge? Isn't there like 3 parts of it that are all huge? Is an interpretation just a story we tell ourselves, or does it actually do work? If you're looking for a unique experimental prediction that says RQM is right and many worlds is wrong, we don't have that yet. In that sense, it is competing on the grounds of logical consistency. However, RQM provides theoretical utility. It gives us specific conceptual tools that other interpretations don't, particularly when trying to merge quantum mechanics and general relativity. Okay. So it gives us quantum gravity to unify physics. We need. Okay, so it's providing us conceptual grounds from which to create experiments and hypotheses. Preserving locality, solving the paradox. I'm guessing this is spooky action. Spooky action at a distance. But at the okay, many worlds. It preserves locality, but at the cost of infinite universes. And in this case, it preserves locality without the extra universes. So yeah, it depends what you want. Do you want extra universes, but you have a reality? Or do you want no reality with no extra universes? And I might go for no reality with extra with no extra universes. Like that might actually win out. All right.
That's keeping all.
Alex O'Connor, what's going on here? Have you changed your mind on anything? That was the question.
All of this together, right? And brilliant. And now we can send rockets to the moon. Awesome. Thank you, Newton. But Newton, as I like to point out, explicitly in the Scholium to the second edition of the Principia Mathematica, writes, as for...
Man, Alex would school me on like all these different books and like knowledge about different philosophers and scientists and all these things.
What this gravity thing
But I would love to just like learn
hypothesis
from him
non-finger,
saying
he writes.
stuff like
I
that.
frame no hypothesis. He's saying he doesn't know. He doesn't know what gravity is. He doesn't like, he's just sort of coming up with a mathematical description and thinking, well, if we just treat it as though there is this force that works in this mathematical way, everything works, right? And guess what? It does. But most people know, at least to some degree, that Newton was wrong, right? Because Einstein comes along and like a century later and is like, however long later, and says, actually, that's not what gravity is. It's a bending of space-time kind of thing. So Newton's maths worked, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be glad that he had this system, which, when treated as though true, allowed us to do all kinds of stuff. But it wasn't actually accurate in terms of describing the nature of the universe. And I think a lot of what's happening in like quantum mechanics, and this is uncontroversial, by the way. This isn't like me coming in and saying you quantum fit. Like a lot of.
And this is right on time, given what we just read.
People will say this. They'll be like, yeah, I mean, that's all we're doing is we're sort of mathematically trying to model the world, and that's fine. But if you're a philosopher, you're going to want to know, well, what's actually happening, not just how to describe it. And of course, as you said as well, it means that scientists are only really telling you what things do. They're not telling you what things are. At the most fundamental level, at least, a scientist just doesn't really have the lexicon to tell you what a thing actually is. So even if you ask them a trivial question like,
I don't know if I would say it's like they don't have the lexicon to tell you. It's just that you can't tell someone what something is with a lexicon. It's almost a more fundamental problem. And what's nice about that quantum theory that we just read is that it actually, it's, and I'm going to toot my own horn again, it builds in its own contingency into the framework itself. It says that, hey, like here's a framework that says that it can't tell you what the reality is. And that type of humility in the framework, built in the framework, is where I think we need to be right now. I think it provides you so much power, in a sense. If you're interested in researching social media addiction, I would recommend researching the ideas of Tristan Harris, who is a tech ethicist who's done research on this. Okay. Tristan Harris. Where do we talk about addiction here? Okay. Social media addiction research ideas of Tristan Harris. Thank you very much. Energy Dompter.
Like, you know, what is a table made out of? They might tell you, well, it's made out of wood, and that's all very well and good. But if you don't know what wood is, then you're going to ask them, well, what's wood? And they're going to describe some kind of chemical composition, which I do not know. And then you ask them, yeah, but what's that? What is that thing? What is that made out of? They say, oh, well, it's made out of atoms. Okay, what's that? Well, protons and electrons. Okay, well, like, what is an electron? Well, it's kind of a fundamental particle. Okay, but like, what is it? Well, it's a negatively charged particle. Okay, what's negative charge? They'll tell you what it does. They won't tell you.
I'm such a, like, I feel like I'm going to be such a, what would be the word here? I don't know. A container of chaos. If I were to, like, be in this conversation, like, I feel like these guys are so professional with the fact that they have this conversation. They know this conversation is going to be on their channels, and they're talking through these ideas, these concepts, very thoroughly and effectively and accessibly. And until I'm in the mode where I'm trying to be like a teacher rather than a learner, I'm gonna want to just like cut the line. I'm gonna say like, okay, can we get past this? Can we get to the part where the rubber hits the road here, like the front lines of this discussion? But obviously they're having a different type of conversation right now. It's just that, you know, there's so many important things to talk about. I would want to just skip ahead. Welcome back, Birdbanes. I think we're gonna watch like I don't know, like maybe just 5 minutes of this, and then we'll watch more tomorrow. Maybe we watch to the end of this thing, or the end of this one. We'll see.
What it is, and not out of not out of spite or anything. They just can't. All of the fundamental physical sort of qualities of the world.
One Cambridge graduate
maths,
and one
charge,
Oxford graduate teaching
kind of
popular philosophy talk and
like defined in terms of what they do. Like maths is often defined in terms of resistance to acceleration.
Of a group,
which is like cool, but what is it? You know what? Like I can touch it. It's here. Like what is this stuff that I'm engaging with right now? I'm not engaging with resistance to acceleration. Well, I am, because if I push this microphone, it resists acceleration a bit. Okay, that's useful. Cool. I can use that, but what is it? What is the thing that's resisting acceleration? And science just doesn't have the language to answer that. And that's not to say that we've got this like spooky supernatural thing going on. It's just to say that when the scientific method decided that mathematics is the language of the universe, as Galileo famously had it basically just like a priori just ruled out the existence or truth of anything which cannot be described mathematically.
Probably within 2 hours of each other.
I think there are definitely things that can't be described mathematically.
Those two were so
in particular, when it comes to consciousness, I don't think you can capture consciousness in the language of science and maths. So you've kind of got two options. You either say Galileo was right, and therefore consciousness, I guess, just either doesn't exist or is somehow reducible to the physical stuff of the universe, or you say, no, there's nothing like spooky or like weird about consciousness. It's just another thing that exists in the universe. But Galileo was wrong to say that the scientific method is the way to approximate it. Now, people will say, I'm going on a bit of a rant here. People will say, okay, but like, when can you ever say what something is? You know, all we need is to say what things sort of do, and that allows us to sort of navigate the universe. Yes, if you're a scientist, in the same way that if I was talking to a chess grandmaster, and I sort of lift and slightly adapt this example from my friend Philip Goff. If I was talking to a chess grandmaster and I wanted to learn how to win chess, right? So I say, like, what is a chessboard made out of? And he goes, well, it's made out of, pawns and major pieces and minor pieces. Okay, cool. Well, what are major pieces made out of? And what are major pieces? They're like bishops and horses, right? I think those are the.
I know. We've played
ones.
chess twice, and you completely thrashed me both times because I'm terrible at it.
Well, I should have looked this up before. I'm pretty sure that the major pieces refers to like bishops and knights, maybe also rooks. I'm not sure. Anyway, and then you say, okay, well, what's a bishop? And as a chess grandmaster, the most helpful way you can answer and truthful way you can answer is, well, a bishop is a piece that only legally moves diagonally across the board. Okay, cool. And then I sort of say, yeah, but what is it? What is a bishop? You'd be like, well, what do you mean? Like, that's it. Like, we're playing chess. That's all a bishop is. It's defined by like what it does. You just play a game, and this is how it moves. So okay, fine, and then I could play chess and I could win. And it doesn't matter what you use as a bishop. You could use, an AirPod case or something, and as long as you know the rules of how it moves, you can play chess. And that's great if you're a chess player.
Mm.
But if, like, I'm that kid's dad who's trying to learn chess, and I'm a carpenter, and I want to make him a chess set for his birthday, and so I go, hey son, what's that thing you're playing with? Oh, it's a chess set. Okay, well, can you just tell what's it made out of? It's like, oh, major pieces and minor pieces. Oh, cool. Oh, this bishop then. What's this bishop made out of? What are you talking about? Well, I mean, what's the stuff? What's the thing you're moving with your hangers? I'd quite like to go and build one for you. And the son goes, well, it's just a piece that moves diagonally legally. And he'd be like, okay, but I feel like you haven't fully answered my question here. And the son goes, no, but my grandmaster told me, like...
So this is kind of where we get to enjoy our normative pragmatic grounding, where we can point out that all of these facts that he's talking about pertain to some action or implication of action. What you need to do in order to believe that thing, or what believing that thing implies you can do. So, he's trying to make the case that a material understanding of the chess pieces is in some different domain than using the chess pieces in a game. However, the dad wants to be able to do something. He wants to be able to make the pieces. So this information is practically relevant for that type of action. So obviously there's different contexts involved, but at the end of the day, it's still just relations of facts to other implied facts and concepts to concepts. And these relations you can think of as normative. So if chess pieces are made out of wood, then I need to get wood if I want to make a chess piece. Something like that. If I don't know how to make things with wood, but I know how to make things with metal, then it's a problem if chess pieces can only be made with wood. All these things are there. But I don't think we should think about like the physical makeup of something as in like a separate category than simply concepts. These are just conceptual thoughts, aspects of our understanding about what's going on that, follow the same metaphysical rules of concepts that all other concepts follow. Okay. Nice little moon back there. This is pretty nice, if that's what you're referring to. Maybe we should get ourselves a nice little moon. It seems like Alex O'Connor is touching on the relational interpretation of quantum physics here by pointing out that we know what things do and not what things are. Yeah, I mean, that's one way to go about it, actually. I think we can make an effective connection from the theory that you shared to what he's pointing out. Now, I think he's, the way that they're talking about this stuff, they would conflate consciousness to that discussion, where I think that the understanding or a discussion of consciousness deserves its own type of discussion. If we're going to talk about the space of consciousness, like we want to stay, monistic in that space. We want to talk about just the metaphysics of experience or concepts or whatnot. We don't want to mix and match. So still the quantum theory is talking about things outside of consciousness, right? It's talking about reality as defined by relative perspective. So it's pointing out that there is no like fundamental reality, a singular reality, but it's not pointing out the type of relative conscious view that we would want to point out for the type of discussion that Alex is having right now. What's he trying to say? Like trying to squeeze a blank basketball through a kitchen sift, right? It's another linguistic convention. It's at the end of the day, all these things are linguistic conventions.
Like, that's all there is. That's all you need to know. It's like, that's true in the context of chess. And similarly, you might maybe knowing what an electron does, knowing what, spin and charge and mass and all that kind of stuff does, is all you need in the context of science, in the context of like practical reality, which in fairness is the reality that most people live in, so no problem. But if you are actually just still interested in what stuff really is made out of in the context of philosophy or metaphysics, I don't think it's enough, man. I want to know what's actually there.
I mean, it's a fair enough question. I suppose.
Yeah, I think everything's pointing to all the stuff we get from science points to the fact that there wouldn't be the thing in itself. There wouldn't be the fundamental truth of what things are, and like the theory of quantum relativity that we just saw, like, even points out that in that space there would be no fundamental bedrock. So you know what? Maybe this would be a perfect pair theory for us to just pick up and run with. But I don't want to give up with many worlds because it is kind of fun, but it's very unintuitive, and I think both are really unintuitive. It's really unintuitive to not have a grounding of the physical world, but it's also unintuitive to have many worlds. So, pair. I did say pair. Very, very nice.
Because I think it might help bring out the contrast a little bit better. Can you give an example of something that you think we do have a description of what it is? Just so like we can bring out this contrast between what something is and what it does.
Unfortunately, this is where it seems to get a bit question-beggy. But to clarify, as a throat clearing, the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to say there's some kind of gap with physics and let's plug it in with consciousness. It's rather for me to point out, like, to make a sort of cumulative case, that it seems to me that if you actually want to know with certainty what a thing actually is, there might only actually be one such thing in the universe, which is phenomenology, which is experience, right? And to the extent, and it's kind of like this.
So this is going to get us right back into the integrated information theory conflict we just had. The only thing that exists is our conscious experience. Okay, Heidegger. I'd always see it as science and philosophy as human attempts to model the world reality as we experience it. Naturally, a model is less than what is actually modeled, less than what is actually being modeled. Yeah. Yep, that's the other thing. Like, if we were to theorize that these things can be captured, right? The in itself of reality can be captured. It certainly can't be captured by human conceptualization. Now, we can go farther and we could say that it can't even be captured by experience. That's kind of the whole point of Hegel. He points out that we're constantly in this process of experience where we're always moving forward and we're noticing what we saw things as. We're constantly seeing like the way that we truly saw things as. We're constantly just noticing that, but we're always operating in this new space. So this is why for Hegel, like he calls it the the absolute concept or something like that. And it goes to infinity. It just keeps going on. And then also for Heidegger, we could also look at the fact that we're always ahead of ourselves. We're always towards potentiality. We're never there. We're never at the thing itself. We're always constantly towards potential. We never collapse finally in a this is the way things are. That's why truly coming from Heidegger, that gives me the grounding to feel comfortable in this position, even though obviously this position is one that he even describes as very much not one of comfort. But yeah, okay, what do we got here? Aspect realism. Tomorrow we can go over, either read or ask AI to summarize this paper on aspect realism. Okay, what I'm calling aspect realism is just an immaterialism or phenomenalism that emphasizes the central role of the aspect metaphor in accounting for the first personal character of what is called experience. It does so without adopting the indirect realism or representationalism that merely seems to be required when addressing the way that the world is given, always from this or that perspective. Okay. We might want to just throw it into the... it's not too long. I'd be more concerned about interpreting it, but maybe we throw it into the model and then we read it, and then we have something that like is helping us along the way. Maybe I could even put that in the prompt, say something like, we're going to read this right now, but I just want something that can guide, that can some prior for us, something that can bias us towards understanding what's being said. Experience like color blindness will be lacking for those afflicted, or colors for those who are afflicted by blindness. Yeah. I guess you're saying that they're not going to be able to experience colors in the way that we would say that you need in order to experience colors. Brain fart earlier in the morning. No worries. Yeah. Once again, I think that we assume that just because we have this, like, we understand ourselves to be experiencing something, that something is some separate domain somewhere. And, I think the physical counterpart to this actually gives us like a good way to think about what is constituting this phenomenal experience that we're having. So yeah, if we were colorblind and we could point out why we're colorblind in the physical description, we're not going to have that aspect of experience. So we can point out that aspect of experience is literally the activity that is now not, that is missing, or the difference of that activity in the brain. Okay, I do like the concept, the prospect of reading this. So let's do that. Okay, I think we're done with RQM. I need to remember RQM. What is this? Relational quantum mechanics. That's so easy to remember. I don't know why I kept. I don't know how I lost that one. All right, so relational quantum mechanics, easy. We got to read the most recent thing. Response on this discussion, and we got to continue with automatic behaviors tomorrow, but then we're getting to aspect realism and we're continuing this video. Why do we need to know what the mind is? Ooh, the plot thickens. All right. What's going on? RQM, long distance dating. Yeah, oh, that's pretty good as well. Relational quantum mechanics. Yeah, that's the app name. Relational quantum mechanics, RQM. Tagline: spooky action at a distance. That's the play. All right. Thanks everyone for chilling. Thanks for supplying us with tangential topics and whatnot. Yeah, have a good rest of the day.